All right, welcome to episode 20 of the Vegan Body Lab podcast. I'm your co host, Gabriel, and today we're talking with Dr. Rachel Stricker, who's based out of Oregon. So today's episode is a deep dive into the world of naturopathic health and wellness and Stricker's unique approach of using food as a healing tool and exercise as medicine. Rachel, it's great to have you on the show. How are things over in Oregon these days?
Oh, they're doing great. We've got the daffodils popping up. Spring is on its way, but I'm not holding my breath because sometimes we get March snows. But yeah, things are going well. Thank you for having me today.
Good to have you here. Well, talk to me a little bit about your background. Obviously, you've been working as a naturopathic physician for quite a while now. Tell me a little bit about your, I guess, like intro story into getting into health.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am one of those people that's just been a lifelong athlete. So I played lots of sports growing up. I played some lacrosse in college. I actually coached a high school lacrosse team for a little while. I had a transition where, so in undergrad, I should start there. In undergrad, I was studying psychology, and I was going to go
Mhm.
on to be a clinical psychologist and then found out about naturopathic medicine. So I grew up in Ohio, so it wasn't very, well known, especially back then. And
Sure.
so then I, spent another year studying and doing all my pre-medical prerequisite things that I needed to do while working as a personal trainer. So was still, very much in
Okay.
the nutrition athletic realm and went to
Yeah.
naturopathic school. That was, I went to school in Arizona, and it was such a, I learned so much, but it was such a beautiful place to really heal. I was in my early 20s, and there was just so
Mm.
much self-discovery that was going on at that period of time too. So, and I worked for a
Make
year in Phoenix before my family and I moved to the Pacific Northwest. We've kind of moved farther south as we've gone. So I was working in the Portland area in Southwest Washington at the beginning of my career. Worked in Eugene for a long period of time, kind of in Central Oregon, and now we're settled into Southern Oregon. So just kind of right over the California border.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And so it definitely sounds like, I mean, well, you've been all around the country, as have we, and it sounds like there have been kind of like a few turning points for you in kind of like your educational career, then your actual working career. Like, what specifically drove you towards naturopathy then over then choosing psychology? I guess was there a specific stimulus or kind of like aha moment for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I first found out about it, I was in one of the psychology halls my senior year of undergrad. I was going to Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I
Mm.
was like, well, what's that? And started doing research. And it was one of those just aha moments that we have in our life, something that's just has this
Mhm.
blinding light around it that just can't be ignored. I mean, I was reading about naturopathic medicine and it was just like, all of these little bells were going off like, duh, 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 this is what you're supposed to do. And it was hard because I was getting ready to graduate. I had already been accepted into a PsyD program. And so I really did
Mhm.
this 180 to go in that direction. And, I told my parents and they thought it was crazy. They're just like, what do you mean you're not going to be a psychologist anymore? But, when it really came down to it, naturopathic medicine, and I still believe this today, is just such an all-encompassing way to access health because there's the
Mhm.
psychology. We absolutely studied mind body medicine, and I continue to really spend a lot of time in my clinical practice, focusing on people's emotions, their mental capacities, taking care of mental, emotional health and spiritual health too, like full mind, body, spirit kind of things. So it took all of
Mhm.
those aspects that I loved about psychology and then expanded from there. And it was like, oh, I also get to study nutrition. I also get to study
Right.
I also get to study homeopathy and botanical medicine and I feel like I've always kind of been a very nature centric person. Even growing
Mhm.
up, spent a lot of time just building forts in the woods and was always just a natural animal lover and really just always connected to the elements in that way. So naturopathic medicine just made so much sense. So when I discovered it, I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. So it was a very destiny
Yeah.
driven aspect.
Yeah. I mean, it comes across. Yeah, you can definitely tell like this is kind of like your chosen path. And from what I'm like listening to and what I'm hearing, like it definitely sounds like this is in alignment like with who you are as a person, like, nature based, kind of like, more connected with kind of like more natural based methods of healing. I mean, how would you describe the difference between naturopathy and then allopathic medicine then in that case, because I think that maybe there's not such a clear definition on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I think it's a really interesting thing about naturopathic medicine too, because we're trained at the accredited medical schools in all the biomedical sciences, just like any MD or DO is. And then we also study all of these other natural modalities. So a few of the ones I mentioned, the mind-body medicine, the nutrition, botanical medicine, homeopathy. We study a lot of hydrotherapy. There's most of the schools are also studying Chinese medicine because in a few states,
Mm,
naturopaths are also licensed to practice Chinese medicine and acupuncture, like in Arizona where I went to school. And so we're doing all the
mhm,
biomedical things. We have to pass rigorous testing after our second year and then again after our fourth year. And so there's a board, these are like board certification, this testing that we have to do. And so we do have to study diagnosis and laboratory tests and pharmaceuticals and intakes, and then we get a ton of
mhm,
clinical training then our third and fourth year. Both there's on-site clinics where we'll see patients that actually come into the student-run clinic, and then you go out into the community too. So we preceptor with different doctors and I preceptored with many MDs. I preceptored with orthopedic
mhm,
surgeons because I was really interested in sports medicine at
mhm,
that period of time too. I worked at
mhm,
free HIV/AIDS clinics. I worked at, kind of low income schools and pediatrics as well. So there was really a broad spectrum of what we learn. And so I think some of the main differences, all naturopaths, this is kind of a joke in my profession that we all practice so differently. There's people that are like the biohackers and they're using all the peptides and all the injectables and doing all that. And then there's like the nature curists that were just like, let's just heal with homeopathy and water therapy. So there really is a broad spectrum of naturopaths. That's maybe it's one thing why our maybe why our profession doesn't seem to be growing at the rate that we would all like it to, because we can't agree on anything. So it's a funny thing about naturopaths. We have so many tools on our tool belts that, people tend to choose a few of those tools and specialize. But, I think that where naturopaths really shine, in our current, medical model in the United States is one in preventative medicine. This is something that,
mm,
MDs are just really not taught to focus on, and two in chronic health, because a lot of the kind of conventional medical care is for acute diseases, for prescribing pharmaceuticals, for doing surgeries, for taking care of symptoms, where naturopaths are really
right,
focused on
right.
discovering the root cause, right? Like, how did this happen in the
Mm,
first place? You need that in chronic health because there's so many layers. There's so many layers to why someone develops a chronic disease. It's not just, oh, this one thing occurred, I broke my ankle and this is what we're dealing with. It's like, no,
mhm,
this was
right.
years and years and years and, genetics and diets and lifestyle and emotions and stressors. And it's like
Mhm.
that person's unique picture. So naturopaths are really well trained in getting to that root cause and peeling off those layers of the onion, as we say.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And kind of like what I'm understanding from this definition and very helpful, because it sounds like it's multifactorial, it's multi-layered. But I guess on one side, you're basically saying that naturopaths basically not only do they kind of like get the same kind of like educational pathway as like, quote unquote, like normal MDs or allopathic doctors, but in addition to that, like they're also learning like a whole host of other kind of like healing based tools, healing based methodologies that are supportive to the actual core root of the problem, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. And where we, see the differences is one, we have accredited naturopathic medical schools in the United States and Canada, but the term naturopath isn't a protected term. And so there's lots of like naturopaths who are traditionally trained in Europe, and they're not
Mm,
physicians, they haven't been trained medically, but they practice a lot of the same modalities. So there's not really a protection for that term naturopath. which is why it gets a little crazy. And, this is like, the age that we're all dealing with this. There's lots of people, who are
Sure.
going to online schools and claiming to be naturopaths and things, even in the
Yeah.
United States. And so, it's not a protected term. So that's where things get a little bit confusing. Someone who went to naturopathic medical school is a medical doctor,
Okay.
but it gets confusing in that way. But yeah, that's the beautiful thing about it. But our regulations are state to state. So, here in Oregon, I'm licensed as a primary care physician. But for instance, if I would go back
Mm.
to Ohio, I would have very different things of what I'm able to do. So you can't really practice medicine. You're not really able to diagnose and order labs and that kind of thing, or, order
Gotcha.
any medications and things. You could certainly still, consult on nutrition and homeopathy. And again, many of those modalities that we have, but it's just the regulations are from state to state. So it depends on what state you are, how naturopathic doctors are able to practice and what they're able to do.
Makes sense. Yeah, and that's actually very helpful because then for somebody who's potentially kind of like investigating or kind of like learning the lay of the land of like naturopathic medicine is like, okay, like is this person actually, a naturopathic doctor or are they just a naturopath? Like what's their experience, their background? Kind of like all, this it reminds me so much of like kind of like the weekend certifications that you can get for to become a personal trainer. It's like, I don't know how many and
Absolutely.
because you were a trainer for so long. It's like, wow, it's like wow,
Yeah.
anybody can become a trainer and just call themselves or a health coach or all that. It's like, but then it's like, somebody who's has like years in the trenches, they've been training and they've gotten like, high level sort of, it's like, but they're a trainer too, right? So it's like, how do you kind of like discern? And that's like where it comes down to is like actually discerning like what's actually legitimate, what's authentic, and what actually will get me results and something that, anybody can just put a poster up and be like, yeah, I'm a trainer,
Yeah.
I'm a naturopath.
Oh, it is certainly the trouble of our times, across the board, like being able to really come from a deep place of intuition and discernment, within ourselves. But yeah, anyone who's ever looking for a naturopathic doctor, I definitely recommend, you check out their bio, you even ask them questions. And, if they didn't go to one of those couple of accredited naturopathic schools, then they're not actually, trained medically. It doesn't mean that they can't still help you. Maybe they'll be a perfect fit for you because you do want to just kind of get into mind
Mm,
body medicine or, help with nutrition. So I don't want to discredit those people because, I think that there's many paths to healing and like our world needs healing so much, so everybody needs to find, someone to work with and then hopefully my goal for people is really to be your own doctor, to really do your own healing, to empower people enough that like they're
mhm,
confident in moving forward with your health. Like that's the interesting model of naturopathic medicine. We're in the business of getting people better. Our kind of
mhm,
conventional medical world is not, it's people who have to take these pharmaceuticals the rest of their life. And the minute
mm,
they stop taking them, all
mhm.
the symptoms come back. So, that
Right.
model, keeps people kind of in the system where ours is like, let's get people better. Let's empower them to carry
Sure.
on and continue to
Yeah.
heal outside of our office walls.
Makes sense. Independence over dependence. So,
Yeah,
Rachel, I mean, this is a good
absolutely.
segue. I mean, what's your perspective on the current state of modern health? Like, where are we at now? What's going on?
Yeah. I have to say it's pretty dismal, but I also want to have hope that it is improving. We
Mm,
have,
mhm,
as I'm sure you and the listeners know, I mean, we have obesity and metabolic health epidemic in our country. I think that things are
mhm,
starting to improve. I want to be hopeful that people are starting to have a little bit more recognition about the things that they're putting in their body and how much we actually are affected by the food that we eat. So I
mhm,
want to hope that that's moving in that direction. The other thing that is concerning right now is that we're seeing younger and younger people being diagnosed with cancer. Before cancer was kind of
mm,
a disease which we all were affected, one in two people, 50% are going to be
mhm,
affected by cancer. That's crazy. That's already a super high
mhm. That is
percentage. But what's more
sure.
concerning is it used to be people in their 60s, 70s that would get cancer, kind of just something that was occurring. And now,
Mhm,
we're seeing more and more people under the age of 50 getting diagnosed with cancer, especially colorectal cancer. That's a really big elevation right now. So that's
mhm,
really concerning. And so we have to
mhm,
really look at all of these factors. So, diet is huge. What we're putting in our bodies every day is huge. our chemical exposure is huge when it comes to chronic
Hmm.
diseases, especially things like cancer. And, we have to just look at how we're living our lives, as Americans, as our entire society, that this rushing, this constant state of stress is damaging our bodies so much. And not only just damaging our bodies, but it's damaging the future generations too. So,
Hmm.
we know that like a lot of our genetics actually comes from our grandmother's egg. Like that's in our grandmother, that egg is what we eventually become. So it's not only what, we're exposed to today, and not only what our moms were exposed to while we were in utero, but that egg that was inside our grandmother, so it goes
Hmm.
back those couple of generations. And so that's where we
Makes
have to
sense.
look at the whole picture, and we really have to just start we have to make some changes, as a society, in the way that we live, in the way that we eat, the things that we're willing to tolerate, and the things that we need to start standing up again.
For sure. For sure. And I think that's, well, it's very helpful to hear you say that because I think that with some of the topics that you mentioned, metabolic health, obesity rates, chemical exposure. I mean, I think on one side, and I think that's where the optimistic part comes out. It's like I think there is more awareness being raised around a lot of these topics. And at the same
Right.
time, I think that the solutions being presented are kind of like typical of what the health and fitness industry has kind of like thrown at us for years, which is kind of like, band-aids, things
Yeah,
like, now weight loss drugs or,
right.
different kind of like biotech food or,
Yeah,
changing chemical products for one chemical for another chemical. It's like, it's kind of like, okay, it's like, it's just not, we're not going to the core root, right? And again, that's like the
yeah.
heart of naturopathy is actually going to the core root, like addressing that and then just
Mhm.
moving it on, like moving on from that, like permanently just solve that. And you're a
Yeah.
PhD candidate. You're studying the gut brain axis and mind body medicine. I like tell me a little bit more about kind of like some of the subjects that you've been going on in there and like how that correlates with how you help your patients on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I've been practicing medicine now for about 13 years, and I've spent a lot of time in primary care. And so, primary care, the gist of it is really like you see everybody for everything, and one of my really early on practices that I had was I was working with, low income patients, working
Mm,
primarily with Medicaid patients. And so,
mm,
a lot of my colleagues would tease me and be like, wow, like you're in the trenches, like baptism by fire, and it did feel like that in so many ways because those patients that were coming to me were so complex. Many of them had
mm,
not received any, or at least not adequate healthcare for decades. And a lot of those patients also, because there's such a primary care shortage in Oregon for sure, but I think it's really kind of across the board.
mm,
Those patients also, when something came up, they would go to urgent care, they would go to the emergency room. So there was really no follow-up, no follow-up for a lot of those chronic things. So I
sure.
saw the complexity of health, because of that. And I really, especially with those Medicaid patients, I mean, those 3 years, I mean, I was on the verge of burnout, working at that clinic because I was prescribing more pharmaceuticals than I ever thought I would prescribe. Back in
Wow.
naturopathic school, I was one of the nature curists. I was one of the just like, let's just keep it really simple.
Hmm.
I was the president of the Naturopathic Society, which was all just like those really like root down, grassroots kind of naturopathic medicine, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and then I'm finding like I have to help this patient. They can't afford these supplements. They can't afford to eat organic food. Like,
Wow.
I got to meet people where they're at and I've got to do
Sure.
something.
Sure.
And so I saw the complexity, learning to meet people where they are. And also like finding, we call it sometimes in naturopathic medicine, we call it green allopathy. So, it's still like prescribing a lot of supplements. So you're not prescribing medications, you're not putting band-aids on things, but you're
Yeah.
prescribing a lot of supplements. So it's like you have this symptom and you take this for this and this for this and this for this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And is it better? Sure, maybe. Like we're talking about, replacing essential, amino acids, about, using herbs that work so synergistically in the body. So
Mm,
that's the kind of things that are in your supplements. But, is that getting to the root cause? Sometimes, sometimes that's curative and
sure.
it's correcting things, but you're also just kind of trading symptoms for something to take. And I
Yeah.
really, I really believe that there is a better way. And so I really wanted to get into, and I'm sharing all of that because, especially with gut health, there's so many
Hmm.
complexities to gut health, right? Like you change your diet, sure, things are probably going to improve. We give you things like L-glutamine and herbs that are
Hmm.
carminative herbs. Yeah, we're probably going to reduce the bloat. If you have a parasite and we treat it, sure, those things are going to get better. But what we know,
Hmm.
especially in disorders like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, there's this huge gut-brain connection. So, the vast
Hmm.
majority of people with IBS have experienced sexual trauma in their life. And we see
Hmm.
correlations across the board with lots of chronic diseases and the traumas that we've been exposed to. And this is the gut brain, studying the gut brain axis is certainly a really big body of research right now. We're discovering
Hmm.
that this is where the immune system lies, that this is where we're creating neurotransmitters from, that the gut itself has its own nervous system. And it is in this
Hmm.
constant feedback loop with the
Hmm.
brain, with the central nervous system, with the vagus nerve. So,
Right.
you can't just treat gut disorder with just diet or just supplements or just, doing a cleanse. There has to be that address of the gut brain axis, of the mental emotional aspects of the things that we carry in the gut. So this program that I'm currently in with the quantum studies, I was really, again, I have these beautiful serendipitous moments in my life. And so I was living in Eugene. I went to this used bookstore and I was with my, son, my toddler at the time, gonna pick him
Hmm.
up a couple of books. And I was just browsing through just to see what I found. And I found a book called The Quantum Doctor. And I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. Read the back cover, was like, this is cool. And I remember I was like just kind of casually reading the book. I think I was in the bathtub, reading the book. And there was just like it was again those like bells that I kind of talked about when I decided to go to naturopathic school, right? Like those bells
Yeah.
just kind of kept going off. And I was like, I feel like this writer is bringing all of the things that I feel in my heart onto pages and
Hmm.
I'm reading it. And it's
Hmm.
just like, how did they know that I felt that way about things, right? And so I was like, who is this author? I had no idea. I just picked this book up so seemingly randomly. And I found
Right.
out
Right.
he was a quantum physics instructor at the University of Oregon. And I was in Eugene, which is where the University of Oregon is. And I was like,
Oh
wow,
wow.
that's wild. And I'm like, you
That
know
is
what?
crazy.
I'm gonna send an email. I'm gonna tell this guy I'm reading his book and that it's really awesome. I send this email. I think it might have been same day. I get this email back from Dr. Amit Goswami, and he was just like, hey, you want to meet for coffee and talk about it? And I'm like, yeah, like it's like getting to meet this amazing author, this like person who's just bringing this whole all of your kind of personal philosophies to life. And so
Yeah.
he started telling me about this program that he was creating, and just if you'd love to study with me and deep dive into this, we're creating certificate programs and master programs, but like you should do the PhD, you should take this all the way. And so that's how I kind of got into things. But the basis of his, now he's a theoretical quantum physicist, and that's what
Hmm.
he taught at the University of Oregon for many, many years. But
Hmm.
what I really love about his work and about what I'm doing is this intersection between spirituality and science. And so
Hmm.
bringing all of those things together. And so that's what really resonated with me because I grew up in the Christian church. I had
Hmm.
a grandfather who was a pastor, and a missionary, and several uncles who were like pastors and missionaries too. I went to, Catholic school as Xavier University is a Catholic Jesuit school. And
Hmm.
interestingly, that's really where I started questioning everything, right? Like being there
Hmm.
at the Catholic
Hmm.
school, I had my first year, it was like an intro to world religions class or something. And the nun who was teaching my class, also was a Buddhist. And,
Hmm.
she is the one who really got me questioning everything. And I think there might have been
Yeah.
a really short period of time that I even questioned whether or not God actually existed, but it really was allowing me to unravel some of that religious trauma, that I had growing up
Hmm.
of my grandmother telling me about hell and that, I was going to go to hell if I was bad. And if I didn't say my prayers every night, the devil was going to come get me. I mean, like all of those things were
Yeah.
super imprinted on me as a child, right?
Yep.
And I had to really undo all of that. And so she's the one that first got me questioning things and looking at other world religions and realizing, I mean, this is my big thing, is that our path to God, our connection to God, doesn't need to go through anybody else. Like, this is a very
Mhm.
internal, always there connected experience. And so it's perfectly fine and healthy to, cherry pick, if you will, from different religions, because they do all have value. I don't think any of them are perfect,
Mhm.
but they do all have value.
Yeah.
They are teaching us how to, be good citizens, to be good children, to be good um, to be good parents. Like, there's a lot of those things that are in place in religions for good reason. But we have to,
Mhm.
at some point in
Mhm.
time, develop that personal relationship and see what that definition is for us. And so, to be a scientist that can also have this really direct connection to God, allows so many other
Mhm.
things in life to be more beautiful and to make more sense. So I can continue with my scientific mind of always wanting to discover truth, so wanting to know how things
Yeah.
work, to wanting to make sense of things. And also at the same time, knowing that consciousness, that God is the base of everything. And so this quantum
Mm.
program that I'm in is a part of that. And my work with the gut brain axis is a part of tapping into that deeper self. So in our quantum sciences, we say that we've got three brains. So the one that's in our head, the one that's in our heart, and the one that's in our
Mhm.
belly. And we know this, even, chakra science has been around forever, right? This
Sure.
Ayurvedic, Ayurveda and Chinese medicine are the most ancient forms of medicine. And so
Right.
the chakra system is
Well, you
is a
just
really
saying that,
big
I
deal.
mean, yeah. Yeah, well, the one thing that just came to my mind right now when we just said about, the you said the head, the heart, and then the gut, the 3 brains, that,
Yeah,
like, immediately the first thing I thought was the Jing,
absolutely,
Qi,
in
and
Chinese
Shen. That
medicine.
was, like, the
Yeah.
first 3 thing. Right, and TCM. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And those that it's very true. And there's a scientific basis for it too. That's what's really cool, is like, we really just discover why these ancient forms of medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, have stood the test of time, and how even back then, when,
Mhm.
those doctors, those healers didn't know anything like we know now about biochemistry,
Mhm.
about pharmaceuticals, about anatomy and physiology, but like, they were healing. Why? Because they were looking at the energetic systems of the body. And that word energy is kind of a taboo word, but it's really true. We
Sure.
know that those areas of the chakra are also areas where there's a high level of neurological activity going on. We have
Mm.
all of these
Mhm.
nerve networks. So just like I was talking about in the gut, it has an enteric nervous system. It has its own nervous system in the gut. And so those
Wow.
are the places where we're
Wow.
also
Amazing.
tapping into, right? Like that's why it's a high energy center. That's why it's a chakra, because it's
Mhm.
full of those nervous system pathways.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So
Yeah.
kind of like full circle right here. So taking kind of like the studies that you're going through, obviously combining that with your patient work, combining that with, like, I know that you have, you're well versed in a few topics, with stress physiology, metabolic health, exercise recovery, a sustainable
Mm.
plant-based nutrition. I mean, so how does that all come together? Because from what you've shared so far, so diet is important, but it's not the only thing. Exercise is important, but it's not the only thing. Gut
Yeah.
health is important, but it's not the only. So it's kind of like, mind, body, spirit, kind of like. So how do we combine it all together then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, I like to talk with my patients a lot about lifestyle modifications. And this is where we really get sustainable wellness. So even kind of coming back to what I said about green allopathy or conventional medicine, where we're taking a pharmaceutical which puts a mask on it, or we're taking supplements and they're maybe fixing some of that biochemistry, but there's changes that we have to implement into our life on a daily basis in order to have sustainable wellness. And so in order to really truly heal and continue to peel back those layers of the onion, as I discussed. And so putting that
Mm,
all together, yes, what we put in our body is so important. But I also don't want to create problems for people, because the truth is that, humans are very social eaters. We're very emotional
mm,
eaters. And there's a reason
mm,
for that. If you put people on this really restricted diet that isolates them and they can't eat with their family and they can't go out with their friends and how is that going to be helpful? Like that's isolating,
Mhm.
that's causing problems. Or, for people who they're almost afraid to eat because they have a reaction every time they eat pretty much anything. Like that's a problem,
Mhm.
right? Like we
Mhm.
need to be able to have peace with what we're putting on our plate, right? And it's one of the reasons
Mhm.
why I'm vegan, probably one of the reasons why you and many of your listeners are too, like that's a very
Mhm.
conscious
Mhm.
choice. For me, it absolutely
Mhm.
always comes to health. There's a lot of amazing health benefits for being on a plant-based diet. We do see lower rates of
Mhm.
cardiovascular disease. We see lower rates of cancer, the two highest killers of
Mhm.
people in the United States, by the way. So maybe that's an important
Mhm.
thing for us
Mhm.
to consider. But for me, it also is this spiritual
Yeah,
aspect.
absolutely.
I've been a I've been a yogi for over 2 decades. And so it wasn't in
Mhm.
alignment with my soul to consume other conscious beings. So that
Right,
is
right.
where it creates peace in my life too. So we have to be able to
Right.
implement those things in, be peaceful about the things that we're eating, be able to still enjoy food, enjoy the experience of eating, allow ourselves to eat,
Mhm.
vibrant foods, allow ourselves to be able to share food with our loved ones, to be able to eat slowly, consciously, mindfully. I teach a ton of
Mhm.
mindful eating with people, like taking a breath, saying a prayer, just tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system so that we actually can digest our food. I mean, how many of us eat in the
Makes
car in traffic, grab a bar on the way out
Sure,
the
sure.
door? Like we need to be able to like bring
Right.
back sitting down at the table and making it a ritual, right? Like that's where like the best digestion is going to take place. So those are some of those lifestyle modifications, moving the body every day, finding the right kind of
Mhm.
exercise for your body at the right season of your life. So I think I mentioned to you before we started airing, I've been an athlete my whole life. Like I was like a gym
Mhm.
rat for a long time, lifting weights and always doing that. I became a long distance runner at one period in my life. I was super into hot yoga and, high intensity interval training. But, here in the last year and a half of my life, like I just turned 40. I went through a super stressful situation with having to close down a business after working like 70-hour weeks. And everything in my body was
Oh,
telling me
wow.
to slow down. Exercise has always been
Mhm.
stress relieving for me. But my body was just like,
Mhm.
girl, like we can't you can't do those crazy workouts anymore. You have to slow down, like I was having panic attacks when I would like get on the treadmill or my heart rate would get too high. It was like, wow, like I
Mhm.
gotta slow down. I gotta like pull back from
Yeah.
things a little bit. So I continue to move my body. I still move my body every day, but like I can't work out like that because it wasn't right for my nervous system. I hope to return to some of those things at some point in my life because they're beautiful, but we really
Mhm.
have to look at we
Mhm.
have to look at that. And I talk to my patients about that. I recently had a patient, a perimenopausal woman, she was exercising all the time, she was doing Zumba, she was like doing spin class, and she was just like, oh, I come home and I am on the couch and I can barely move. And the next day, like I'm so exhausted. And she was having trouble
Mm.
losing weight. And it's just like, well, yeah, because
Mhm.
you're up in like zone four exercise, and you need to
Mhm.
be down in zone two. We need to not trigger cortisol in your body. You need to slow your heart rate down.
Mhm.
You can exercise, you can move your body, but not to that capacity that you've done in the past. Like we need a little nervous
Right.
system reset. And so yeah,
Right.
those are all things that we have to look at of like making those small little changes because sometimes the things that are seemingly right, like, oh, I eat healthy, which is very subjective, by the way. I hear that a lot from my patients, like my version of someone eating healthy is very different than what, most of my patients coming in is, or well, I exercise like crazy and I can't lose weight. And it's just like, okay, well, we've
Yeah.
got to make changes. You're, what you're doing seems like it's
Right.
correct, but we have to reframe it a little bit. And it's not the right time and place. We change as human beings. Like we don't give nearly enough credence to this, but it's really true. We change we change with the seasons, from years in our life, from winter to summer, like we have to allow that adaptability. Like, the world around us is constantly changing. Nature is reflective of that. And we're just, a part of nature. So things aren't any different in our own body than what we witness. out in the world, in nature, as well as in a greater scheme, the way society is going, the way that, all of the
Mm.
problems and things that are in society are a reflection of what's going on in our inner spaces. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kind of like what you've been alluding to with the lifestyle behavior modifications. I mean, this comes back to kind of like what started you on this journey in the beginning, which was psychology. Actually
yeah,
understanding like how humans work, how humans operate, and then helping support them to make the right behavioral modification changes, basically habits, right? Like choices, and then
yes,
steer them in kind of like the right direction. Like I'm kind of hearing like naturopathy, it's kind of like yes, it's a path for like optimal healing and health, but it kind of like on the way to that path, it's like we're kind of like course correcting a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, like I'm coming in to see, Rachel and I'm like, hey, Rachel, I'm eating so healthy, I'm working out so much. And, you take a look at my diet, it's like, okay, maybe I'm eating a lot of like high fat, high cholesterol, like animal based foods. And I've been told it's healthy. So I'm like, oh, this is great. Lots of eggs and maybe, some
yeah,
processed meats, it's good, right? It's organic, right? So it's great. Maybe I'm doing like,
yeah,
1 hour hit classes, 6 days a week. So it's kind of like what you're saying here, what you're suggesting is like first glance isn't everything, right? We gotta like look beneath the surface and kind of like just start to peel things back,
absolutely.
especially like during different age phases. Like I'm hearing like, after 40, especially for menopause, especially for women, and even for guys. I know guys, my understanding guys around 60, they have kind of like their own version of like male menopause too.
Yeah.
So testosterone levels are dropping. So it's like, what we did in our
And
20s.
unfortunately, that's another thing we're seeing younger and younger in men, right? Like, so it used to be 60s, but it's much younger now. So there's been a big change in men and their testosterone levels. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of even 20, 30 something year olds with bottomed out testosterone. So, but that's a big problem across the board for people too.
What's going on then? Like what's causing the increase in kind of like, diseases like cancer now is like showing up younger, testosterone levels, for men. So what's going on? Like is the world just becoming unhealthy? Are we just using more chemicals? What's going on?
It's a multifactorial kind of thing. I mean, I think it's the way that we're living our lives. I think it's like this tremendous amount of just chronic stress that people carry. I mean, the
Mm,
fascinating thing is like our bodies physiologically don't really differentiate between like having this low level, chronic stress, worrying about money, housing, the state of the world, our relationships, versus like getting chased by a tiger, like it's like, this is the way our nervous system works, right? Like that, if we were getting chased by a tiger, we get that rush of adrenaline so that we can run,
mm,
it's the whole fight flight or freeze, kind of aspect of our nervous system, we were never meant to sustain that kind of stress, right? Like because you get away from the tiger or you get eaten by the tiger or you fight the tiger,
right.
whatever, and then it's over. Like that
Yeah, yeah.
tiger isn't constantly just creeping around every corner like the way that our stressors are in our life. And so I think that stress and cortisol, because cortisol has this huge correlation with our blood sugar levels, with the way that we store fat, with the way that we sleep,
Mm,
and so we have a society that's constantly stressed out, constantly in the state of uncertainty, not sleeping well, not eating very well,
mm,
exercising less, having less social interaction. This, our
mm,
digital age, our information age it's beautiful in so many ways, but it is causing especially younger people to socialize and be
mm,
in person with people so much less. Like humans are
mm,
pack animals. Like we need to be together. We need to share germs. We need to f- be able to read other people's emotions, to be able to,
mm,
see other people's faces, interact in that way too. So I think that
mm,
that is certainly one aspect of it. And then yes, like our food becoming more and more toxic, less and less nutritious, and the level of toxins that we're exposed to and have been getting exposed to for several generations, just like I kind of talked about earlier with, our grandmother's eggs
mm,
being really that first carrier of that maternal DNA, which is a place where we get a lot of that ability to detox, a lot of that ability to handle the toxins in our environment and our levels of exposure for sure. So it's a combination of things.
Well, a lot of people, you may have heard this as well. In fact, I'm probably confident you've heard this. A lot of people would just be so quick to just say like, well, I guess it's just my genes. Like they'll hear you. It's like, God damn it. It's my grandmother. She screwed things up for me. Right. So it's kind of like with
Yeah.
that kind of like frame in mind, right? Cause that's kind of like the victim mindset, right? Bit more of a fixed
Yeah.
mindset. It's like, okay, well, I guess, my cards are dealt, right? I can't really do anything about it. Like it is what it is, right? I guess I'll just, live, how is the quote, like, you only live one. I'll eat whatever I want, or
Yeah.
I'll move my body the way that I want. With the kind of like genetic component in mind, I mean, obviously we know that lifestyle modifications can specifically turn on or activate certain genes, and also maybe not activate them, or maybe not as
Correct.
predominantly. So I mean, what would be a
Absolutely.
few kind of like key areas, like that you would suggest, like, hey, like if you focus on like nutrition, or if you focus on exercise, like stress,
Yeah.
sleep, you alluded to a few things, like what would be the key areas for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up a great point, like our genes really shouldn't be seen as just like, oh, this like destiny, like nothing that I can
Right.
take care of, nothing that I can control like this. I'm just destined to have this because of my genes. So that we
That's
have a
correct.
much
Yeah.
better understanding of genes than we used to, and it's the idea of epigenetics, right? And it is just like you said,
Mm,
that you can turn on and off those genes, that sometimes those genes are just because
mm,
we're a carrier doesn't mean that we're destined to get that disease, right? Like, so we have to
right.
look at that. And so brings up a great point, and it's really this idea of inflammation. And so, inflammation is becoming another kind of big buzzword, right? But there's a ton of truth
Mm,
to it. And it does come back to our immune system in a lot of ways. So our immune system is responsible for inflammation. Our immune system,
mm,
and we can look at this from an injury standpoint, right? Like when we, sprain an ankle, all of those immunofactors are going to rush into that area. That's why it's so painful. That's why it swells. That's
mm,
why it bruises, right? We have all of those things because you're sending in all of those healing factors, all of those healing signals are coming through, right? And so
mm,
we have that aspect of acute inflammation that's really good and really important. And there's even therapies these days that are actually mimicking that state of acute inflammation to heal long-term injuries, like a platelet-rich plasma therapy, where you're basically like taking those healing
mm,
factors, you're injecting them into an area, and being able to mimic that acute inflammatory phase so that you can go in and repair and heal. But we think of
mm,
cancer also as being a very inflammatory disease. We have the microbiome of the gut, which more and more people are starting to recognize, but we also have the whole terrain that's inside of our body. And, a lot of the new theories on cancer is that, even cancer, even those tumor cells, there's a whole terrain that cancer cell is creating. And it's a very inflammatory terrain. And so this is where that idea of getting these antioxidants in, of getting the inflammation down, so anti-inflammatory. This is one of the main driving forces why the plant-based diet is so healthy for the body when done
mm,
right as a whole
mm.
foods plant-based. I'm not talking about eating a bunch of vegan junk food because that's not going to help either. But
Sure.
when you have a whole foods
Yeah.
plant-based diet, it's very anti-inflammatory. It's very high in fiber. We don't have a protein issue in this country. Even plant-based people don't have a protein issue. It's a fiber issue
Mm,
that we see in this country, right? And so when you're eating
mm,
a big diversity of vegetables and fruits and plant-based products, you have a
mm,
diverse microbiome, which is going to support the immune system, which is going to be very anti-inflammatory. So we're creating this healthy terrain within the body. I tell people all the time,
mm,
control what you can control. There's a lot of things in this world that
mm,
we can't control. We can't control our genetics and what we're born with. We can't really
mm,
control, the toxins that are sprayed on our vegetables to some extent. You can buy organic and things, but we don't have complete control over so many things in our life. So control the
mm,
things that you can control, making sure that you're getting good quality sleep, making sure that you're eating healthy food and a nice diverse diet and lots of like fruits and vegetables to like hit all of those antioxidants, all of those amino acids, right? And
mm,
then taking care of that stress component, because chronic stress is also a very inflammatory disease process. So it all comes
Makes
back to
sense.
that inflammation. Cardiovascular disease is a very inflammatory disease process. So we have to look at those things of like what's causing inflammation. So the food, the toxins, whether or not we're resting, whether or not we're exercising, drinking good water,
Hmm.
breathing. Like most people don't breathe very well, take deep breaths. And then
Right.
handling
Right.
that chronic stress, because it does cause a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. And there's many ways to do that. There's many paths to do that, but you have to recognize those stressors, making some changes in your life, and having, stress management practices, whatever that looks like for you. It doesn't have to be
Right.
journaling and meditation. You just have to find something that you can
Hmm.
do consistently that puts you into that parasympathetic state to reduce that stress.
Makes sense. Right. Right. So, I mean, if there was like a particular like villain or kind of like core root, then it sounds like we're kind of like circling right here. Inflammation is kind of like going to be a big is going to be a big player here, in terms of kind of like a lot of
Yeah,
the conditions and concerns and yeah, diseases that we see coming up. And part of the solution, what you're advocating here, is number one, obviously having some sort of like mind body practice where you're able to kind of like reduce
yeah,
stress, hopefully on a daily or mostly daily basis. So that way we're not kind of like living in this elevated, chronic, stressed out
yeah,
state. At the same time, nutrition, it plays a big role then, obviously with a whole food plant
yeah,
based diet. I mean, you're probably familiar with Dr. Campbell's work on, cancer and kind of like the China study and things like that, all the revelations
absolutely.
that came, decades ago, just showing like, yeah, basically, I mean, in the case of heart disease can't even exist, in the case of like, whole food plant based diet, it's like basically just
Absolutely.
non existent,
Yep.
same thing with diabetes and probably most forms of cancer. And then the final thing that you said there is, and this is interesting with epigenetics, because basically like that expression, like the turning on and off, as they say in epigenetics, like turn it on,
Yeah.
turn it off. It's like, it's so interesting
Yeah.
because it kind of like, it gives you back the reins, right, in your hands to say, like, actually, if you want to turn on the expression of, A, B, and C, like your lifestyle will control that, right? Versus if you don't
Yeah.
care, like, there will be a higher likelihood that you may express, your grandmother's, condition or whatever health concern that
Right.
may have been going down through generational health, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point. And of course, me as like a quantum science researcher, like this is very near and dear to my heart. But I think it's problematic to have anything in our lives that are very deterministic or dogmatic, right? Like that this is like the only way, that it has to be, because it leaves us
Mhm.
it leaves us feeling very powerless. And like more and more people need to be empowered. More and more people need to wake up and realize, how much control they actually have over their body. And it does come from our mind. It does come from our consciousness, like it might seem like all of these things are just happening to us. And like, yeah, like we're
Mhm.
going to breathe, our heart's going to keep beating, whether we're aware of it or not. But the more and more that we become aware of it, the more and more control we can actually have over those things. And so, in the world of quantum science, like everything is a possibility. Everything is probability, right? Like we'll
Mhm.
see, what happens. It could go any of these ways. And so getting out of that deterministic sort of mindset, or feeling like we don't have any power, we don't have any control, and really like taking that control back. And so much of it is from our conscious mind. It's the way that we
Mhm.
think about ourselves, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we feel about our body, the things that we do behind closed doors. That's
Mhm.
what really matters for long-term health.
Yeah, yeah, it's all important, it's all interconnected. You're a mother, I believe you have two boys, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting, I've been thinking a lot about this with generational health. I mean, what's your
Hmm.
perspective in terms of kind of like, passing on a health legacy for your kids and kind of like your family in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, it's teaching them early, like my
Mhm.
boys are really good eaters, and their teachers, our family members, like other people are just like, wow, like your 6-year-old eats salad. And it's just like, yeah, because that's what he grew up eating. Like that's the food that i
Yeah.
that i make. Like that's what we share in and eat as a family. I mean, there's even
Mhm.
been speculation or theories around, that we do we see obesity run in families, right? And so there's been conversations of like, oh, is there a genetic component to this? I
Mm.
mean, perhaps to some extent, but we also know that like families are eating the same diet, right? Like what the food that you're growing up on
Right.
is likely going to be the food that you eat later on. That doesn't have to
Yeah.
be the case. You
Yeah.
can always make changes, right? Like I grew up in Ohio, like
Sure.
very meat and potatoes household. Like when I told my
Yeah.
mom at 16 that I was going to be a vegetarian, she's like, "You're on your own, girl. Like you got to make your food yourself because I don't know what to cook for you." And I was like, "Okay, like we're going to figure this out, right?" But, so
Yeah.
creating that legacy around what healthy eating looks like, about what real food is. Some of you have probably seen the video or the writings about urban urban school kids. They take them to the
Mm.
a garden or something, and they see a carrot being pulled out of the ground, and like it's the first time that they're realizing like does they grow in the ground? They grow in the dirt? Like people pick these because so many people's experience of food is like what's on the grocery store shelves, right?
Sure.
And I
Sure.
think that this is a big problem even with meat eating in the United States, is that we're so far removed from realizing
Yeah.
that that flesh that you're consuming actually came from a living being, right? Because you just
Yeah.
buy it at the grocery store. You didn't have to raise that cow. You didn't have to slaughter that cow yourself. Like you didn't have to see its eyes. You didn't have to see, it bleed, not to get
Hmm.
too graphic on things. We don't need to go down that path, but it
Yeah.
does, it
Yeah. But it's
disconnects you
effects.
from what
Yeah.
you're consuming. It's the fact, right? And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think that for me and my family, like I'm really teaching my kids to be health conscious, to understand, what real food looks like. And my 13-year-old, like he's like a super athlete, like he
Mhm.
puts himself through like training programs, like he's super focused on his macros, like he's not doing it in a weird obsessive way, but like he's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like this is how you train your body as an athlete. And it's
Right.
meaningful to him. And so he enjoys food and he eats good healthy food, and like he has this connection to his body. And it's a beautiful thing because so many of us weren't taught that when we were growing up. But we can be that change, if that's how we teach our children and teach future generations to like have this deep connection to their body, to feel empowered over their own health. Like that's a big, big deal.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the biggest deal, really. I mean, that's what it all
Yeah.
comes down to. Is like what's happening in the family unit, because then the family unit spreads, to the community unit, and then the societal
Yeah,
unit, and then obviously we get bigger and bigger ecosystems. But yeah, you're absolutely
absolutely.
right. And yeah, I think it's beautiful the way that you are describing it, because it sounds like the way that you choose to live your life with intention, with consciousness. I know that you've used that word a lot, and that's, I mean, just that word alone, that's a very, we could do a whole episode on just consciousness itself, which
Absolutely. We could.
is a
Yeah.
it's just a incredible topic. It's something I think most of us, we don't even think about a lot.
Yeah.
But last couple of minutes here, I wanted to touch on a couple of things with
Yeah.
regards to your expertise, and I know that you've seen, or you've
Sure.
worked with a lot of people with autoimmune diseases, things like Lyme
Hmm.
disease, chronic infection, Epstein-Barr, long COVID, things like that. I mean, if
Yeah.
a patient came to you today, they just started, they walk into your office or, your clinic, and they're like, let's say they have, some sort of autoimmune disease. I mean, what would be their first step with you? How would you walk through with them?
Yeah. So, I do want to just kind of re-emphasize the importance of like going back to the basics, like our basic human needs, like the way people are, sleeping, eating, drinking, what they're consuming and to what degree, that is certainly a basis of all things that I do,
Mhm.
and especially with those patients, like I mentioned earlier, so much of our immune system is coming from the gut itself. So we got to make sure that the gut is working properly and that there's not any problems. And so there's
Mhm.
kind of this old school naturopathic term called the emunctories. And so the emunctories are these areas of the body that we're detoxing from. So you have to have all of those detox pathways open. And so, we're
Could you
thinking about our,
elaborate? Could you
yeah,
elaborate a little bit more on the monkeries? Like what is that
yeah.
specifically?
So the emunctories are our detox pathways. And so we think about
Okay.
the ways that the pathways or the organ systems in which we detox from. So the gut and our bowel movements is one of our big detoxification factors. So just like I said, we have to make sure that the gut is working properly. So we're going to make sure people are having good regular bowel movements every single day, right? Like that
Mhm.
is huge for detoxification. We have to
Mhm.
make sure that people are urinating properly, and that certainly goes to hydrating properly. Most people, Americans, I should say, are chronically dehydrated. Eating
Mhm.
the standard American diets, is one way that just kind of creates inflammation and dehydration in general. And then, of course, eating plant-based foods,
Mhm.
which are really rich in water content. Many of them are very rich in water
Mhm.
content. Like you're also hydrating through the food you eat, right? We have to make sure people are
Mhm.
urinating and detoxing that way, hydrating properly in order to do that. And sweat is huge. So many people
Mhm.
don't sweat regularly. So I use sauna and recommend sauna therapy for, the vast majority of my patients so that we can sweat. People can sweat, of course, through exercise and, even just vigorous gardening and being outside in the summertime too. But like sweating through the skin is a huge aspect of detoxification. And we also have to think about the breath. We don't think about the breath as being a detoxification pathway, but it absolutely is. So again, making sure that people are breathing well,
Mhm.
doing deep
Mhm.
breathing exercises. So I would say like that detox pathway, opening up those emunctories, like I just mentioned, is certainly
Mhm.
a core of what I do. Supporting gut health as a whole is core to what I do. And we see inflammatory processes in those chronic diseases that you just mentioned that I work with a lot. A lot of those complex diseases like the autoimmune disease, like the Lyme, like mast cell
Mhm.
activation syndromes, long COVID. I mean, there's an inflammatory component to all of that. So we do have to address diets and lifestyle in that regard. And I'm finding more and more and more that nervous system regulation in chronic disease is so incredibly important. Because like our bodies get to this place in chronic disease where everything is just kind of seen as a threat, like there's no settling, like there's all this internal turmoil going on, and people like become at war with their bodies, like the conscious mind is just like separate from the physical body, and people don't understand why their body is so
Mhm.
sick or breaking down or why they have these symptoms, and they become hyper aware of the symptoms a lot of time, but also like feeling so separate from them, feeling so powerless and out of control in
Mhm.
that, and like you're fighting this war against your own body. So a lot of that like nervous system regulation in chronic disease is super important, and getting people back to remembering what a state of health feels like. A lot of these patients have been sick for a very, very long time. So they probably like, the last time they felt well was a distant memory, but we have to go back to that point so that
Mhm.
they remember in their cells, in their conscious mind, but like in their cells, what it feels like to be healthy,
Mhm.
what it feels like to be
Mhm.
vital. So we have to work on a lot of those practices. It's like a whole unwinding, right? So, and I
Right.
use
Right.
nutrition, I use supplements, I use herbal medicine, I use homeopathy, I use those modalities, but the true healing really has to be all encompassing. We have to take care of that mind body. We have to take care of that nervous system. We have to take care of the way that,
Yeah.
someone feels in their own skin, right? The talk that's going on in their own mind.
Right. Right. So basically, I'm hearing Rachel that if I came to you, I had like autoimmune disease, and I'm like, Rachel, just give me the prescription, just give me the drug.
Yeah.
It's really not like that. It's really
Yeah.
detective
You're coming
work.
to the
It's
wrong
about like
person.
let's evaluate, let's under right, exactly. Oh
Exactly.
god, wrong person,
Yeah.
Gabriel. Seriously,
Yeah. Yeah.
wrong
Yeah.
office. But
For sure.
it's actually yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually like it's understanding. Like you're playing kind of like the role of a detective, where it's like, all right, let's sit down, let's evaluate. I guess I have some personal context. I've actually worked with naturopathic physicians in the past, so it's like that's been my experience. Has been like, let's get to know you, like let's understand your
Yeah.
lifestyle, let's understand like what you're eating, let's understand kind of like movement, sleep, like the whole thing. It's so
Absolutely.
comprehensive, and
It's
for
whole
anybody who's
person
been through that
medicine.
process, I mean, it's yeah, exactly, exactly. I was like
Yeah.
so taken aback. I was like, wow, like I think it was two or three separate naturopathic physicians that I work with. One was more kind of like I think kind of like Western based, and the other one was like more TCM based. And it was like for both of them, it was like wow, like incredible. Like I just felt like
Yeah.
I felt like I wasn't just being rushed through the process, like just like, normal like doctor client, doctor
Absolutely.
patient, like, they see you for 10 minutes and then they leave and it's like, "Oh, here's your prescription. I'll see you in like, 3 months from now." That kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that you brought up a point a little bit earlier that I just want to, touch on again. And it is like, for me as a physician and how, I hope that all, physicians and providers and healers can see people in the future is like you can't forget about the person that's sitting right across from you, right? Maybe their labs look fine, maybe they look like they're healthy. There was even this meme I
Mm.
saw, many years ago that it was like this woman that was all disheveled and she had like red spots on her skin. And, the doctor's got his clipboard, not even looking her in the eye. And he's just like, well, your labs are all perfect. Like you're the picture of health, but like the person sitting in front of you is falling apart, right? Like, and so
Right.
you have to see the whole person. You have to really see like what's underneath. And I use labs and I use like those functional medicine labs, which are very useful. Doing comprehensive labs can be incredibly useful. But, even, I mean, there's been times that I've done a full, stool analysis on somebody and, it really looked pretty good. There wasn't parasites, there wasn't a lot of abnormalities and things, a couple of little fine things that we can tweak. But of course, I don't stop there because I hear that person and see that person across from me who is afraid to like go out at social events or like can't go on long walks and the ways that their dietary or their gut related issues are affecting their life, like quality of life is of the utmost importance. Like that's really what we look at in integrative oncology too, that it's not just about living longer, it's about living better, right? And so
Hmm.
in integrative oncology, we're using, there's a lot of people that are still opting for conventional therapies and oftentimes should, but we're
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
like giving them support to get to the underlying issues and to make it so that they maybe can take less of the medication or that they have
Sure.
less side effects, because we want people's quality of life to be there. And so that's why you have to look at the person ahead of you. Like, maybe they have great health. I mean, I've been this way before in myself in my life of like,
Mm.
I look to somebody to have an incredible amount of vitality, but also have these like internal struggles. That's why we have to do those
Mm.
long intakes with patients because we have to see the full picture. We have to see every layer of that human being.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, it's very all encompassing and I think that's I mean personally that's one of the reasons why I have a lot of respect for the field and for the practitioners. I mean, like you mentioned I think at the beginning, yes, it may not be growing in the way that you guys want it to, but I think that's what it makes it so special is that everybody's kind of like taking the tools in the toolbox and kind of like expressing it in their own kind of like unique fashion. And I think that's actually probably going to be the correct solution, especially with kind of like a world that's, attempting to be more systemized, more robotic, and kind of like, more artificial. It's like actually, this is the human approach. This is actually the
Yeah.
specialized, like one to one approach that could really never be replaced, because
Yeah.
everybody's got kind of like their baggage, so to speak. Everyone's working through their own kind of like thing, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Rachel, as we start to wrap up here, I guess one or two sentences here, kind of like just recapping your own health journey, how you've kind of like transformed over the years. I mean, how would you define health now at this point in your life? Is there a particular definition that you would define it by?
Mm, it's a great question. I think that I really want to define health with that quality of life aspect, just kind of bringing that back
Mhm.
into play because it
Mhm.
is about feeling good in your own skin and having peace, within your own self and your own body, having moments in your life of just relaxing and doing nothing. I'm a chronic overachiever myself, but I also
I
like
can relate.
take time. Yeah, exactly. So many of us are, but also taking that time to rest and relax and
Mhm.
feel good in your own body and your own skin. And really recognizing those vital functions, like that is really the picture of health again. If you're breathing well, if you're eating well, if you're drinking good
Mhm.
quality water, if you're having a
Mhm.
good healthy bowel movement every day, like those are the things that are like pillars of health.
Mm.
The way that your skin looks and the vibrancy on your face is like another big determinant of health. So, it's the appearance on the outside as well as like what you're feeling on the inside, and just being at peace in all aspects of yourself. Like, in yoga, we have this aspect of yoga that's called svadhyaya, and I love that word so much. And it's the study of the self, taking
Mm.
time to really get to know yourself, get to know your health, get to know your body so incredibly intimately that you know exactly what your body needs at every moment in
Mm.
time, and that you're willing to like be flexible from day to day, from season to season, from age to age on what your body needs. So the more that you get in touch with that, the more that you can respond in a really healthy way. And that creates sustainable health. That creates longevity. That's what's gonna like get you to a place of being, you know, of old age and still having an incredibly high quality of life.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think it's a great way to view it, is basically summing it up with the quality of life. Like, how is your quality of life? And then kind of like the manifestation of that, externally,
Mhm.
internally, kind of like from the whole multidimensional perspective that we are as humans, that often is not
Absolutely.
fully, yeah, it's not often fully addressed. Rachel, if somebody wanted to work with you as their doctor, what would be the best place to enroll, to have an appointment, to just get to learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my website is a great place to kind of start. So it's drrachelstricker.com. You'll probably tag it, I would imagine, in your post of things too. So there's ways to contact me and work with me there. So I do practice. I see patients in person in Southern Oregon, if you happen to be in that area. I also have licenses to practice medicine in California, Washington, and Colorado. So I can serve as a medical provider in those states. We do
Mhm.
offer telemedicine at the clinic I'm working at. We offer telemedicine really around the world, and so I can
Mm.
often work as a health consultant in other states as well. So you can always send me an inquiry about that. And the other aspect is that I'm doing my PhD research right now, so I am looking for participants that have kind of chronic gut stuff. So in the IBS, IBD realm,
Okay.
there is an in-person component. So you would have to be able to come to a location in Oregon for the first one, and then everything else is done kind of a self-practice at home. So
Gotcha.
yeah, particularly if you're a person with gut health. But yeah, I would love to, have the listeners stay in touch and work with me if things resonated, or one of our naturopathic foundational principles is docere, which is physician as teacher. And I hold that really
Mm.
dear, like I'm absolutely a teacher at heart. So I'm always willing to teach and mentor. I do speaking engagements and things too, and host workshops and retreats and things like that. So yeah, there's many ways to stay connected and informed. And I want to empower people to take control of their own health.
But yeah, and definitely, yeah, we're gonna get all of your details, everything connected in the show notes. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Rachel's work, obviously this is a great pathway. Well, I mean, it's one that I've used personally, and one that I highly recommend is a naturopathic approach to healing, to health. So we'll have Dr. Rachel's information below. Get in contact with her. If you guys are in the Oregon area, shoot, I'm kind of like, not that I want to have gut issues, but I'm like, oh shoot, that actually sounds like a really cool thing to like kind of be part of that project. So yeah, if anybody's in the Oregon area, check out Dr. Rachel's project. It sounds really cool. And yeah, really
Yeah,
grateful to have you on the show here today with us,
yeah.
Rachel. It's been great learning from you. There's been a lot of great nuggets. I'm gonna sit back, I'm gonna go through this and just listen. There's been a really good episode with you. Any last words here? Anything else that you want to share before we close out?
I think I just want to share with the listeners that, that you do have the ability to take control of your health, to be empowered in your own health journey. And don't ever think that you don't have that ability. Seek out help where you need it. Working with a naturopath or another healer or a functional medicine provider can be really empowering in and of itself. But, you know, sometimes, and I think that this is across the board, we just need to go back to basics. So check on those detoxification pathways, check on whether you're
Mhm.
eating and drinking and sleeping and doing those basic human needs, because we are just basic humans. We complicate
Mhm.
things in so many ways, but like we if we really go back to basis, we go back to those building blocks. It's so crucially important. So that's what I would encourage listeners to do today after this episode. What I hope and pray for you. So Gabriel, I just want to thank you for what you're doing. Getting the information out to the people and living your truth through your vegan lifestyle and raising the next generation and everything. So thank you for having me today. I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing the wisdom. Thanks for sharing the insights. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, hopefully we can sync up and do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to.
Sounds good. All right. Talk soon.